Welcome back to Huawei Routing and Switching Elite Training. Today topic we are going to discuss on VLAN. Let's start our part 5.
Alright, so I'm back into the VLAN 1. Okay, so here I will go into the VLAN 2. Alright, just now we are using IP subnet, so I'm going to undo IP subnet. Alright. Okay, and I'm going to configure protocol-based VLAN. Protocol VLAN. Okay, so here I can configure based on Apple top or what we call AT, IPv4, IPv6, IPX, XPX, or other protocol. So the question requires us to have VLAN 2 is IPv6. Okay, and VLAN 3 is the protocol VLAN IPv4. Okay, there's a simple one here. So let me do a display current for you. Alright, so you can see that this is the case here. Oops, so I have to go back into the VLAN 3 and undo IP subnet VLAN 1. Okay. Alright, so that clear the setting. So VLAN 2 is based on IPv6 and VLAN 3 is based on IPv4. Next, I need to go into the interface Ethernet 001. And I'm going to change from IP subnet VLAN enable to protocol VLAN. And this is how we can configure that. So let me undo IP subnet here first. Enable. And I'm going to configure protocol VLAN. Alright. So this one will be on VLAN 2. And we have here the protocol index, so we are going to put a 0 here, and we also have another one here, VLAN 2 and VLAN 3, protocol index 0. So when we do a display this is how it look like, and I need to go to Ethernet 002, and I'm going to undo IP subnet VLAN enable, and I'm going to configure protocol VLAN 2 and VLAN 3. Okay. Right, so next we are going to configure so that the PC1 and PC2 will have the IPv6. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. I'm going to remove the IP address on IPv4, and I'm going to configure the IPv6 on 0:0:1/64. Sorry, the 64 is supposed to be below. Yep. Alright, because I'm so used to configure the IP address in the router. Alright, so this is the 2010 1. Okay, so here I'm going to configure PC3. I'm going to remove this. Okay, and I'm going to configure this 2010::2. Okay, and this one is a 64-bit. So let me configure so that I can do a ping 2010::1. Right, so you can see that we have a pinging here successfully. And if let's say we go to the switch number 1, we do a display protocol based VLAN all. Alright, so we have the IPv6 and the IPv4. Alright, so let's look into another configuration here. So this time we are going to do the inter-VLAN communication. Now in this diagram, I have a router here that's perform layer 3, and I also have switch number 1 that's also perform layer 3. Okay, so here we have to configure interface-based VLAN. On switch number 1, we are going to configure interface VLAN 2 and 3, and we also have to configure interface VLAN 4 and 5. Alright, so the VLAN 4, and 5 will be in the router 1. So here I have 4 different hosts, VLAN 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so all the link here, Ethernet 1 until Ethernet 004, all of these will be in SS link. Now the switch will perform the layer 3 and the router will going to perform a routing. Okay, so here in the G001 and E0010, we are going to configure trunking. So this lab combined both the inter-VLAN routing that is using both the switches, the switch, as well as the router. Alright, so let's look into the answer on how you can do it. Now firstly, on the switch, we are going to configure the VLAN 2 until 5. On all the interfaces, alright, port number 1 to port number 4, we are going to assign the appropriate VLAN. The interface on number 10 here will be on the trunk. As you can see that only VLAN 4 and 5, here we are going to use a router. Alright, so only VLAN 4 and 5 will allow to pass through. Okay. Right, so this will be the trunk and this will be all the SS link. And you can see that we configure the logical interface VLAN 2 and VLAN 3. So here we are configured that on the layer 3 switch. Okay. So end of the day, the PC3 and PC4 should able to communicate. PC1 and PC2 should able to communicate. Now as you can see from here, we concentrate just now on config on the S1. So how about the configuration on R1? On R1, the physical interface, which is G001, we are not going to configure any IP, but instead we are going to configure the sub interface. Now this command is very important, which is .1Q termination, that representing VLAN 4, and this represent VLAN 5 using 1.2 and 1.1 sub interface. That will be our default gateway for the host, and this is to enable the ARP broadcast. Right, so let's jump to our lab and see how this is being configured. Alright, so we have here our lab, switch number 1 and router number 1. PC1 and PC2, PC3 and PC4, all of these are belong to different VLAN as well as the different subnet. Okay, so here we have 1 network, 2 network, 3 network, and 4 network. So let's configure our switch first. Okay, let me undo the turn on system view, and this is my switch number 1. So let's configure our VLAN 2 to 5. Alright, then I go to the interface Ethernet 001. So this guy is in VLAN 2, so let's configure port link type SS and port default VLAN 2. Okay, so I can just do a copy. Alright, so it's okay. Alright, so I go to the Ethernet 002, port link type SS, port link type VLAN 3, interface Ethernet 003. So that will be SS, and that will be VLAN 4, and finally port number 4. Okay, that will be SS, and that will be VLAN number 5. Display port VLAN. So we have 2, 3, 4, and 5 all in SS port. That's correct. Next, we are going to configure the interface VLAN. So interface VLAN 2. Alright, remember that the VLAN 2 and VLAN 3, we have our layer 3 interface, which is the VLAN interface here. The IP address is 1.1.1.12. Okay, 24, and interface VLAN number 3, IP address is 1.1.2.12.24. Now if we go into the PC number 1, alright, so you can see that I have configured the gateway as well as the IP. So if I'm going to ping to 1.1.1.12, alright, that will belong to VLAN 2. And if I go to PC 2, so I'm going to ping to 1.1.2.12. Alright, so that will be my default gateway. Alright, so PC number 3, as you can see that my default gateway is in 34, which is in my router. So now I'm going to configure the trunk port as well as the router. Alright, so let's jump back to the switch again. Now the router interface as well as the switch interface are connected between gig 001 on the router, and the switch is Ethernet 0010. So I will go into the Ethernet 0010 port link type trunk port trunk allow pass. Remember that only VLAN 4 and VLAN 5 that is being allowed, so I will just say that 4 and 5. Okay, so that is my trunk port on the switch number 1. So now we go to router 1. Okay, so this is a newly put up router, so I'm going to configure my IP address. As you can see that there's no IP address being configured, neither that I have any sub interfaces. So I go to the interface G001, alright, that will be the one here, dot. Now it will be good if, let's say, we have the sub interface that's followed by our VLAN, so we have a consistency. So this will be providing for VLAN 4. So I'll just mention here .1Q termination VID is 4. Okay, the IP address for this sub interface is 113.34.24. There you go. Alright, display IP interface brief. You can see that I have a 1.1.3.34, which is up. So I'm going to configure a sub interface of 001.5, interface G001.5 .1Q termination VID number 5, and the IP address for this is 1.1.4.34. Alright, that's a VLAN 5/24. Okay, I can do the up broadcast enable here. Same thing go for the interface G001.4. So I enable the up broadcast. Okay, so when I do a display current, I'll show you the configuration. So these are the two configuration, alright, which on the sub interface, this is a sub interface 1.4, 0/0/1.4 for VLAN 4, and that is the VLAN 4 default gateway. Now as you can see that the 001, I do not have any configuration. So now we will back to PC3. We are going to ping to 113.34. Alright, as you can see, it's pingable, and I will also try to ping to here 114.34. Now I'm going to do a ping between device PC3 and PC4. So here I have 1131 and I have here 1141. So I'm going to do a trace 1131. As you can see that it's pingable and it's going through the router, and I'm going to do it here. Alright, so my IP address is 1111 and PC2 IP is 1121. So I'm going to do a trace 1121. As you can see that it's also going through the switch. Now assuming that if you want all of these to able to ping among each other, then switch 1 and router 1 need to configure the routing. Alright, it can be RIP, OSPF, or whatever, so that both of these will know how to communicate, so that both the VLAN 2, 3, 4, and 5 are able to communicate. So we covered that in the IGP earlier on. So now we just look into the basic configuration. So here we have the Inter-VLAN configuration that is on the switch as well as on the router.
Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel.